Well, where do we start this story? I guess Howard told me at one point that you came over for dinner in Port Angeles.
Indeed, it was years ago. I don't remember the specific year. Um, but yes, we were invited to Howard's house. My wife and I went there, invited by you, Howard. Um, and it was a really very interesting experience there, talking with all of you close there to the ocean. And even we went down to the beach, to the shoreline, and it was very enjoyable. I am going to say this experience in this point of the peninsula, of the Olympic Peninsula, for sure.
And you had done some research on one of the topics that we're discussing in our Greenbelt Society meetings. You had done some research on the Elwha River. Were you guys talking about that at the time that you had dinner, or was that not yet published?
Yes, I think the first important thing, if we are going to continue in this, I am going to say tendencies. Howard and I met each other in a type of, I don't know how can I define this because I don't remember now. It was like a type of chambers of commerce convention in Port Angeles. I don't remember now the name of the hotel, but perhaps Howard knows this name. We were there perhaps, I don't know, I guess perhaps 100 people. And that was in those moments when, I don't know why, it was perhaps a coincidence, like many things in our lives, that Howard and I started to talk each other about the Elwha and about the restoration of the river. And since then, this is when this type of communion started, I am going to say. No?
Mm-hmm.
Now, from that point, yes, we started to discuss about Howard's experiences of the river, and I was explaining to him my experiences also through my field work doing the dissertation, the doctorate dissertation. And even Howard was very polite, not only inviting us to go to his house, but also he invited me to go to one of his friends, Ed Snyder, that I think Howard told me he died very recently. And it was really, I can tell you, that conversation between Howard, Ed Snyder, and his wife and I was really fascinating. Yes, this is how we started to exchange information about our experiences of the Elwha River, no?
And flash forward, Howard and his company have a project now in Alaska, which is posing many issues, putting many issues and topics on the forefront for us, and one of them being climate change and its impacts. How in the line of that project, we're seeing different impacts from having to move the village to the discovery or the rediscovery of the old village, to the remediation efforts that have to take place because of the permafrost melting and the tanks leaning and leaking and those kinds of things. So with that as the scenario now, I will say that I'm amazed that we can go to a place, thanks to Howard, and take a snapshot of something that we otherwise normally wouldn't see, in tangible photographs and, real life drama. Like we were talking about John Hunter and his COVID concerns just now. That's the hot news, right, off of the press. And And in that environment, you know, we care about what's going on up there, and we care about them and this larger thing, this larger process of coming to awareness around an environment, you know, and hurdles that are being faced and opportunities that may present themselves. So I just wanted to give you a lead in with that big picture and let you follow up on that from your perspective as a professor, you know, your engagement with students and all that. Do you have any, you know, professional, personal thoughts here that can help us understand the educational side of it?
I mean, first of all, I have to say, as you say, thank you very much for Howard that is inviting us for this Arctic experience, I am going to say, there in the Bering Strait in Alaska. I mean, educationally speaking, Robert, this experience is fundamental for very different reasons. First of all, because of it is creating a visibility of marginal communities, of the indigenous, that most of the times, as you know very well, had been marginalized, not only by the United States, by in general, corporations, private and public agencies, not only in North America, but around the world. You know, it was the visibility, obviously, is really crucial because this project is making visible this marginality. Second, because it's giving us a type of framework to understand and to make public what is happening, especially in the Arctic areas. Global warming and climate change are affecting everybody around the world, correct? But in the Arctic regions, in the Arctic ecosystems, the global warming is impacting in a much bigger scale compared to the standard and average areas around the world. And the issues are really very sharp in these Arctic areas. Think about the permafrost, think about the destruction of the ecosystems, very radical temperatures. In other words, this is really fundamental, educationally speaking, pedagogically speaking, because you and Howard with this project are able to demonstrate to thousands or millions of people what is going on in these Arctic territories. And third, I am going to say, ecologically speaking, globally speaking, in terms of education. No? Unfortunately, we are living in a type of pedagogic crisis in our country and around the world. I mean, only we need to think about who is the main director of the educational department in our country. Miss Betsy DeVos, a person that during many years tried to dynamite the public educational system in this country, together with some type of private forces trying to put down the education of many communities in our country. This is why the project that both of you are doing there is fundamental. It's fundamental because it's telling all of these people that don't have the access to see this with their eyes, what is going on there ecologically speaking, socio-economic, politically speaking, with these communities that are becoming visible. No? This is why in terms of education, this project can be really crucial, no? For sure.
We were talking about COVID and the new requirements for communication and outreach. And part of that is built into the project, and that Howard's remediation strategies on the ground in Quinnahock have to be documented and managed. And as a result of COVID, we thought of using live streams in a creative way to do that. I think that's facilitated the group that we're involved in. Is that your opinion? Do you think there's some sort of future for this means of interaction?
You are talking about some type of future for your project specifically or for our group or?
Well, both. I mean, the Zoom interaction is really kind of new. I mean, we used to talk about distance learning, and it involved more time for professors and less pay, you know, essentially, and more responsibility, and so then here this is thrust upon us. Like, is there a way that you see that it becomes creative and self-sustaining? You know, at least in the sense of being inspiring or inspiring action or participation?
I think for me it's becoming, and I can tell you this, Robert, I prefer to be in person in any dialogue, even in the classes or in conversations. But because of these unprecedented times of epidemic with COVID-19, it's fascinating to think in this way because this type of digital platforms are opening new channels that were unthinkable before. Like for instance, yeah, I prefer to be with you and Howard now in person in the same room talking about this. But this communication is astonishing. And I think even after or thinking about in a type of post-COVID period, COVID-19 period, I am thinking about that obviously to continue with in-person meetings, but this is telling you something. We need to continue with this digital interaction, and we need to start creating perhaps other type of pedagogic and conversational mechanisms, like you can be in class, but at the same time you are under a Zoom communication. Why? Because it's becoming very clear. I think it's going to be very difficult in the future. Even our group is constructed in the distance. Without these technologies, I am totally sure it could be impossible, this conversation. Not just because of the technology, it's because perhaps we didn't know each other.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I think, yes, I think I am able to see an enormous potential here for sure. Or think about how you are going to broadcast this experience for Alaska. It could be possible in a different way.
Right. It's very close to emergency communications.
Correct.
I mean, I used to work for a public agency, and I recall that their budget for communications for video in that case was based around emergency communications. That if something should happen, or there should be a downturn or an event, you know, that even the basic ability to see what's there becomes extremely important, and to see who's there, you know. And that was many years ago when we were relying on taped video, you know, and then we'd send off a taped video in the mail, you know.
Exactly. Or think about during really centuries how the communication, let me say, between the metropolis and the colonies was by mail. Think about, I remember, there is a fascinating book. I don't remember now the title, but the book is based upon, the main argument is based upon confidence. In other words, you send a letter from the capital, in this case was under the Spanish Empire. You send a letter with a command from the governor in Spain, going to America, taking 5-6 months if the letter arrives, because obviously storms, whatever. Think about the governor of the colony receiving the information, meditating about the answer, and returning again to Spain. No, there was more than 1 year. Can you imagine if Howard and you are going to be in the same information dynamic with Alaska? It could be really very difficult. This is why these technologies, I think, are opening unexpected possibilities here, especially for the visibility of these communities, because you are able to make them visible now, not 2 years later.
And it seems like all of the events are compounding in real time. Like, for instance, there's a date on the cleanup. There's an anticipated date on moving the village. there's a date that when the first snow is going to fall. So there are real-time events taking place there that that are difficult to deal with, or where the situation, you know, with COVID and both the warming temperatures make it more difficult, I think. Like, what do you think about that conversation? Are you like having the same conversation that you were back then? That's what I'm kind of getting at. Only the situation has changed, and maybe the urgency has changed, or other things. And it kind of gets to the idea of like, okay, well, I mean, you know, we have a shared interest in the environment, let's say, right? So how does that manifest itself from time to time, or year to year, or something happened 5 years ago and now something happens in this new way now, or has to happen in this new way now? How do we adapt ourselves in our conversations?
That is a good question, because I think there is obviously, for me, always there is an ecological background. Conversations or our experiences or anything that we want to do or to think is ecological.
Mm-hmm.
And our ideas about nature are constantly changing. Not only we, but because we are integrated in a civilization, our perspective of nature is changing. I mean, you are a filmmaker, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Think about just films from the 80s and the 90s. Most of them even were not talking about anything about global warming or climate change. Nowadays, you have global warming even in the dinner, I am going to say, of a TV series. Now, we are changing very fast. Not only the system, the civilization, but we integrated there. The conversation that Howard and I had, I don't know, it was perhaps 10 years ago, 9 years ago, in this hotel, in this convention in Port Angeles. First of all, not everybody was talking about climate change.
Mm-hmm.
Even when you were asking people about the Elwha River, very few people were connecting the restoration of the Elwha River and global warming. Nowadays, yeah, there are connections. And there is another important thing in that meeting. It was a Chambers of Commerce meeting.
Uh-huh.
In other words, the main background was about business. And yeah, they can be talking ecologically speaking, correct, for sure, but the environment was not the main goal for many people in that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
This is why when I was there, I was like, I am going to say, like very lost, because many people were talking a different language. This is why our conversations are changing. And I am totally sure, even I don't know how our conversations are going to be even 5 years from now. But yes, we are mutating. Our perspectives are mutating. Our ideas of nature are mutating. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think back on those times in Port Angeles that you're referring to, and I was there. And when I recall what I felt, what I was saying, what I was hearing, the conversations I was having, we hadn't really begun, you know, to take the environment seriously. And I remember the polls in the elections that we would hear, and it would say, okay, well, what do people care about? They care about the economy. They care about the stock market, you know, I don't know, whatever else there is, right? And then they get down to the bottom and it's like 0.02%, you know, indicate that they care about the environment. And I think that's changed, you know, but we've changed too. Like, I wouldn't be saying the same things I said 20 years ago.
I agree totally with
I was
that.
just not, you know, even thinking. And I feel embarrassed about that, actually, about, you know, being old enough to be thinking and old enough to read the signs and understand the science and all of that. But the urgency wasn't there in 2001 to take on even the topic of conversation, you know, of climate change.
And you shouldn't be embarrassed, Robert, honestly, because It is impossible. We don't have this power called clarividence, I am going to say, or visionary elements. Yeah, you can have extraordinary ideas, but it is very difficult to think from the main standard of the civilization where you live.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally impossible. I don't believe in this type of spontaneous generations like many times people are thinking about Einstein. Oh, Einstein was from nowhere. No, Einstein was not from nowhere. Einstein belonged to a scientific community and he
Yes.
was influenced. Hmm? Einstein was not thinking about the string of theory. Why? Because obviously the perspectives were not in the same way 50 years before. And the same thing is happening nowadays with the environment. In the 1980s, even something is coming to my mind, like for instance, the first movies of Mad Max, for instance, or Blade Runner.
Mm-hmm.
If you compare these films to the new films, yeah, they are talking about post-apocalyptic things, but they are not the same cost. It's not climate change and global warming. We are changing. And always I put in the class the same example, Robert. I don't know if you are familiar with a really interesting event that happened several months ago in Iceland. There was a funeral for a glacier.
Oh, I
Can
read
you,
about that exactly.
can you imagine if 5 years ago you celebrate a funeral for a glacier? It's going to be a tragic comedy. Nowadays, no, it's not a comedy. Even there were a few kids crying there in the middle of nowhere in Iceland. Why? Because this is telling us how we are changing our perspectives. We are changing in ways that are really unexpected, for sure. I mean, since the 1960s, when the environmental movements started strongly, I am going to say, but obviously the differences are extraordinary compared to the 1960s in terms of environment. Nowadays, more people are conscious, are more integrated in these dynamics. It would be impossible in the 1960s.
Yeah, it's been an amazing change to be sure. How do you feel about the students that you have that are, 18, 19, 20, 21 years old? How do you discuss this topic with them, and what do you feel may be generational differences that you're hearing from those young people?
I mean, it's fascinating to be with them and to talk with them in very different terms. Because, first of all, they are from a particular generation that didn't experience even the technological revolution. Like most of them were born even inside the internet lifespan. Or they didn't see elements like even Chernobyl.
Mm-hmm.
Chernobyl, for instance, as you know very well, was crucial, not only in terms of nuclear energy, but in terms of the environmental issue.
Mm-hmm.
Or obviously, they were not alive for this type of issues. Now, the new generations are becoming very vital, very vitalistic, and it is always very enjoyable to be with them, and not only teaching, but also sharing and exchanging information. Both of us are very valuable to exchange this information, no? But I think this is why, for me, education is secret, I am going to say. We have an obligation not only to spread the knowledge, but to open possibilities, to open potentials of the new generations and also old generations. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's really comprehensive. Um, and I'm looking for a way to sketch in the perspective of the moment. And so I really appreciate your comments, because I think, that what you said has brought everything into focus just a little bit more for me about how we've changed, and why we are where we are. We didn't really get into why we are where we are. I mean, like Exxon lying for 50 years and that kind of thing, but it is astonishing to be where we are.
I think we are lucky. Many people say, I mean, we include that we are living in very negative times, etc. But I would like to say we are living in fascinating times. Fascinating times because I think some of the things are totally unprecedented. One thing is becoming very clear. How we are changing our perspective of nature is becoming brutal. It's becoming brutal that I don't think during at least many decades or even centuries, we have been facing a radical change in the perspective of nature like we are experiencing now, because there is a type of unknown, uncertainty in front of us. In the past also we have had this uncertainty, like Second World War, even hate against the machines, no? But what we are experiencing now seems like a type of our civilization per se is in a type of borderland. And I think it's a crucial moment, and I think it's a fascinating moment to experience this. Very exciting moment that we can take advantage for sure.
Do you think it motivates people? I mean, the idea of being, let's say, 22 or 23 years old and thinking, all right, I'm studying architecture, or I'm studying water, hydrology, or I'm studying, you know, how to mix alternative versions of concrete without the CO2 release. I mean, do you think this could be and will be a stimulus toward like better design, better engineering, and better behavior?
I think so. I think people even are forced to think in that way, no?
Mm-hmm.
Because they are influenced. They are influenced by the communities, the people that are around. Even some people are becoming resistant, even against some type of governments, no? And I think it's because of we are elaborating step by step like a type of ecological consciousness. I don't know if I can call this cosmic consciousness. People are influenced by that. I am totally sure I am very ignorant about architecture, but if you go to an architecture school 30, 20 years ago, I am totally sure very few people are going to talk about sustainable habitats. Nowadays, everybody practically, everybody's influenced. This is why I think the potentials are extraordinarily open there.